Israel is continuing to bombard targets in southern Gaza. This comes after the United States blocked the UN's bid for a ceasefire in its war against Hamas, who are considered a terrorist group by numerous countries. According to the Hamas-run Health Ministry, more than 17,000 people have been killed in 2 months of Israel's military campaign. The UN says the humanitarian support system in Gaza is at risk of total collapse.
More than 2 months since Hamas's terrorist attack and the beginning of Israel's military offensive in Gaza, scenes like these keep emerging. Medics rushing injured to the hospitals, among them many children. According to the Hamas-run Health Ministry, the latest Israeli airstrikes in the southern city of Khan Younis have killed dozens. Further south in Rafah, targets are also being hit. Many fled to the south earlier in the war when Israel told them to leave northern Gaza.
We were first displaced from Gaza City to Khan Younis and later to Rafah. Where should we go now? Children and women were sleeping peacefully. A 52-year-old woman who wasn't carrying a weapon and a 5-year-old child. Were they launching rockets at Israel?
The strikes intensify as global calls for a ceasefire are intensifying too. In New York on Friday, the United States vetoed a Security Council resolution drafted by the United Arab Emirates that called for a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza.
As long as Hamas clings to its ideology of destruction, any ceasefire is at best temporary and is certainly not peace. And any ceasefire that leaves Hamas in control of Gaza would deny Palestinian civilians the chance to build something better for themselves.
But many Palestinians fail to understand this argument.
America is the one sending weapons. These weapons have been manufactured in America and in Western countries. They support Israel in killing youth, children, women, and the elderly. Allah is our savior and will take care of us. When America vetoed the ceasefire at the UN, they reconfirmed their position against the people who are dying under shelling all day and all night with American weapons.
The UN says the humanitarian support system in Gaza risks total collapse, and most Gazans are unable to flee the territory, leaving them no option but to seek refuge under heavy Israeli fire.
Our correspondent, Rebecca Ritters, joins us from Jerusalem. Hello, Rebecca. What more can you tell us about the ongoing fighting in Gaza?
Well, the fighting has been ongoing right through even this UN Security Council vote for a ceasefire. We've been seeing a continuous ongoing bombardment of the south, as well as a continued push of ground troops further into the centre of that southern city of Khan Younis. We're also seeing a continued bombardment and fighting, quite intense fighting in the northern part of the Strip as well. We know that civilians are being told to evacuate even further south. That has been happening day in, day out now for the last several days, moving from areas in that Khan Younis area down towards Rafah. We know that they're finding it increasingly difficult to find places to go. Many people saying that they've been displaced now several times, and they're not only tired, but they're scared and they just have nowhere to run. Now, the IDF says that Hamas have been firing from some of the so-called safe areas, though we know from the UN and other international aid groups that there really is no safe area for civilians in the Gaza Strip. But the IDF claiming that in some safe areas, as they deem them, that rocket fire has been coming from Hamas and that they've been suffering attacks from those areas. We're not able to verify those claims, though we do know that rocket fire has been coming into the southern part of Israel today. We've also, of course, Eddie, been seeing the cross-border incursions happening in the north of Israel with the border with Lebanon. We know that Hezbollah have been also continuing to fire into northern Israel and Israel retaliating. It's unfortunately day in, day out, we're hearing similar reports and things, of course, predominantly for civilians in Gaza becoming dire and more dire by the day.
Right, and world leaders and aid groups have criticized the U.S. veto on a Gaza truce resolution at the UN. What is the latest there?
Yeah, there's been a lot of criticism toward that vote that veto from the US, Eddie, pretty much across the board. We're hearing from international actors. A top Iranian diplomat, for example, has told the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres that there's a huge risk of a, quote, uncontrollable explosion in the region following that veto. Now, that's something that Iran have been threatening since the beginning of this war. It's not something that we've seen them follow through on, or we've not seen their other actors in the region, Hezbollah, for example, really following through on. But it is something that, everybody, including the US, other international actors and the civilians, of course, are very worried about. We've been hearing from Turkey's foreign minister, who said that the US really now stands alone when it comes to this issue. There's some very strong words there. When it comes to aid and rights organisations, we've heard from Human Rights Watch. They've said that the US risks complicity in war crimes by continuing to support Israel, both militarily and diplomatically. And Médecins Sans Frontières, the aid group Doctors Without Borders, they've been saying that the Security Council inaction makes them complicit in the ongoing slaughter that's going on in Gaza, as they say. So some really, really negative responses to that UN veto. Pretty much the only positive response has come from Israel, who unsurprisingly have thanked the US for their ongoing continuing support.
Right. DW's Rebecca Ritters in Jerusalem. Thank you. I'm now joined by Christian Lindmeier, spokesperson for the World Health Organization in Geneva. Hello and welcome, sir. Now, with a ceasefire out of the question for now and very little aid reaching the Strip, how much worse can the situation get?
Thanks for having me, Eddie. Yeah, this is really the question. Our teams on the ground and everybody outside the office is reporting they don't think it can get worse ever, and then the next day is worse again. That's exactly what they keep saying. From children and people begging for water because the water supply is absolutely sub-minimal. The water system has been shut off. Let's not forget that 2 months ago already. So it's not just bombing and shelling. It's the water system has been shut off. The electricity system has been shut off. So nothing works anymore without fuel. The water supply is minimal because the normal water basin underneath Gaza is a salty water which needs to be desalinated, and that can't happen without fuel or electricity. Children or people who normally need at least 3 liters of drinking water a day, and in humanitarian settings we normally calculate up to 7 liters per person a day with all the needs, and including washing, do now have 1 to 2 liters a day. And as we all know, 1 to 2 liters, if it was only drinking water, is not enough. People are cutting down telephone poles. We get these reports because they need the last piece of wood and try to make any stove or keeping warm. The hospitals are completely, those which are actually still functioning or are partially functioning, are described as battle zones, meaning people lying on the floor, bleeding on the floor, being operated wherever they can, seeking shelter in the same spaces, disease outbreaks, everything is going to shambles.
And it's not just that, is it? The World Health Organization, your outfit, has repeatedly voiced its concerns about a rise in outbreaks of infectious diseases in Gaza. What is being done to prevent that?
So normally there's a good surveillance system in Gaza through the Ministry of Health and the Red Crescent, the various clinics and health facilities, but that surveillance system has broken down. Now we have seen an extreme increase in watery diarrhea already. Cholera, to name it, not yet, because cholera is a specific bacteria, but acute watery diarrhea is exactly the same outcome, it can have exactly the same consequences. So you have an extremely malnourished, weak population, children under 5. We have more than 10,000 of cases of this acute watery diarrhea already in children. We have, of course, skin rashes and lice, but also reports of hepatitis A, hepatitis E. Although here is one of the problems, that the laboratory is also not functioning anymore. So any samples of anything would have to be ported outside to Egypt in order to get tested, and then the respective medicine to be brought in. Any little disease can be cured by antibiotics or by a good surveillance system, by isolating people. But in the situation right now, with people in hundreds of thousands sheltering and pressed together in the smallest zones, being injured, being with diseases, some has said if people don't die through the bombing now, they will die from the diseases.
Yeah, you describe a very dire situation on the ground. Tell me, what do you expect from the international community at this point?
Look, there are those who hold the power on the ground, and that's specifically, of course, Israel, as also the occupying power with specific responsibilities towards the Gaza Strip. They have the power to stop this, and all well understood that they are after Hamas and those who committed these atrocious and horrendous crimes on 7 October, and they still keep hostages, which also need to be released immediately and unconditionally. But going after the terrorist organization and going after the whole population without, as it looks like now, any discrimination anymore, that is absolutely not acceptable. It needs to stop. It needs to stop now. Again, not only cutting people off from water and food, because there's no independent production of this in Gaza, also not letting enough supplies come in. This is a crime against humanity.
Christian Lindmeier, spokesperson for the World Health Organization in Geneva. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Marina Miron is a military analyst and research fellow with King's College London's War Studies Department and joins us now from Munich. Marina, this battle for Khan Younis has become the new focus of the war, it seems. Why is it so important to take for the IDF?
Good evening. Well, it is believed to be a stronghold for Hamas. Therefore, IDF is concentrating its operation on Khan Younis, and it is also believed that there is an extensive network of tunnels underneath the city. And so now we're seeing that the north has more or less been cleared, and now IDF is proceeding with the south. And the idea is then to expand these areas, so to push out Hamas as much as they can, probably towards the middle of the Gaza Strip to central Gaza. And so the idea here is to eliminate as many Hamas as possible with a focus on Hamas's commanders.
Now, Khan Younis is also packed with people that fled from the north of the Gaza Strip. How is Israel trying to avoid civilian casualties now?
Well, it is very difficult because the IDF, on the one hand, has created this grid system. So essentially, they're warning civilians to leave those areas where they expect heavy fighting to take place in advance, using media, social media, TV messages, leaflets, and all that. However, the problem is that even the IDF admits that no area is really safe in Gaza. So what we're seeing is essentially civilians fleeing to Rafah, and that's where the humanitarian agencies cannot provide the necessary aid for so many people fleeing there. And other areas are essentially also quite dangerous for the civilians. So that's a problem for the IDF. Where do you get the civilians on the one hand? And on the other hand, there is a fear that Hamas will leave to those secure areas, the so-called secure areas, together with the civilians.
Now, there are reports of renewed fighting on Israel's northern border with Lebanon as well. How likely is an escalation there?
That is correct. And at the very beginning of this conflict, Hezbollah has stated that it would consider joining the fight when it sees that Hamas cannot cope with the IDF. We don't know right now to what extent Hezbollah is ready to join, certainly does have the military capabilities, and to what extent Iran would approve of such actions, because that would risk losing a lot of Hezbollah's capabilities if the war spills over. So right now we're seeing distractions there on the northern border from Hezbollah's side, but also other groups in the region, such as the Yemeni Houthis, have pledged to target Israeli or any ships in the Red Sea that go to Israel, because there is not enough humanitarian aid being delivered to the Gaza Strip. And we also have groups like Al-Qaeda pledging to kill Americans, Brits, and Israelis all across the world. So it seems like all of these violent non-state actors are throwing their support behind Hamas, even if they ideologically don't always agree with the group.
Marina Miron there, thank you very much.